Every night, Michael Turner would lean over the small bed in the corner of a quiet suburban home, pull the blanket gently up to his daughter's shoulders, and whisper the same words he had said since the day she was born. "I'll always be your dad." It was a promise he never imagined would be tested, let alone broken in a way that would leave him questioning every memory he held close. Because for 5 years, Michael believed he knew exactly who he was in that little girl's life. He believed he was her protector, her provider, her father in every sense that mattered. What he didn't know was that someone else already was. And when the truth finally arrived, it didn't come with warning or mercy. It came folded inside a plain envelope, stamped with clinical certainty, carrying a result that would erase everything he thought was real. One piece of paper destroyed 5 years of love, trust, and a friendship that had once felt unbreakable. But the real betrayal wasn't the child, it was who the child belonged to. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. In a quiet American neighborhood where routines rarely changed and familiarity brought comfort, Michael Turner's life seemed grounded in the kind of stability many people spend years trying to achieve. He was the definition of a devoted father, a man who showed up every day, not just physically, but emotionally, investing himself fully into the role he believed was his. He had a steady job as a logistics supervisor in Ohio, the kind of role that didn't make headlines but paid the bills and kept stability at the center of his home. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't loud, but he was dependable, and to him that mattered more than anything else. His work demanded long hours, but no matter how exhausting the day had been, he always made time for Lily, whether it was helping with small tasks, listening to her stories, or simply being present in ways that felt natural and constant. His wife, Sarah Turner, was the quieter half of their relationship, thoughtful and composed, someone who rarely raised her voice and often carried her emotions beneath the surface. Their marriage, from the outside, looked steady, not perfect, but real in the way long-term relationships often are. Sarah Turner carried herself with a quiet composure that often made it difficult to read what she was truly feeling. She was loving in her own way, attentive to Lily, supportive of Michael, and committed to maintaining the structure of their home. They had routines, shared responsibilities, and the kind of understanding that comes from years of knowing someone's habits, strengths, and flaws. And then there was Lily, their daughter, the center of everything. She had Michael's patience and Sarah's calm nature. To Michael, she was more than just his child. She was proof that his life had meaning beyond work and responsibility. Then there was Marcus Reed, the friend who had always been part of Michael's life, someone who had been there long before Sarah, long before Lily, long before the responsibilities of adulthood settled in. A friend Michael had known since his early 20s. They met through work, bonded over long hours and shared struggles, and over time built a connection that felt closer to family than friendship. Marcus was different from Michael in almost every way. Where Michael was reserved, Marcus was outgoing. Where Michael calculated every step, Marcus trusted his instincts. But somehow, those differences made their bond stronger. Marcus became a regular presence in Michael's life, showing up for holidays, birthdays, and quiet weekends. When Michael married Sarah, Marcus stood by his side. When Lily was born, Marcus was one of the first people to visit the hospital, holding the newborn with a smile that seemed genuine, almost proud. For years, nothing about their dynamic seemed out of place. Marcus would stop by the house unannounced, sometimes bringing gifts for Lily, sometimes just to sit and talk. Sarah welcomed him, though there were moments when her expressions carried something harder to define, something Michael never stopped to question. To him, Marcus was safe, someone who had earned his trust over time. There were small moments that might have meant something if anyone had looked closely enough. The way Marcus lingered a little longer when holding Lily, the occasional joke about how she resembled him more than Michael, the brief silences that followed. But in a house built on trust, those moments passed without concern. Michael never imagined that the two people he trusted most could share a secret that would one day redefine everything he believed about loyalty, love, and fatherhood. The day everything changed began like any other. Lily had been feeling unwell for a few days, nothing serious at first, just a fever that refused to break. Sarah suggested taking her to the hospital, and Michael agreed without hesitation. Sitting in the waiting room, Watching his daughter rest against Sarah's shoulder, he felt the familiar weight of responsibility, the quiet determination to protect her no matter what. When the doctor called them in, the conversation started routinely, questions about symptoms, duration, and family medical history. But then something shifted. A simple question about blood type led to a pause, and that pause turned into a moment Michael would replay in his mind countless times. The doctor explained that Lily's blood type didn't align with what would be expected from both parents. It wasn't a conclusion, just a possibility, but it was enough to plant doubt where there had never been any before. At first, Michael dismissed it. Medical anomalies happen, he told himself. But the thought lingered, quiet but persistent. Days passed, and the question refused to fade. Eventually, he made a decision that felt both unnecessary and unavoidable. He ordered a DNA test. It was a simple process, clinical and detached, nothing like the emotional storm it would trigger. When the results finally arrived, they came in a plain envelope, unremarkable in appearance, offering no indication of the impact it would have. Michael held it for a moment before opening it, as if part of him already understood that whatever was inside would change things in a way he couldn't undo. When he unfolded the paper and read the words, there was no immediate reaction. Just a stillness, a brief moment where his mind struggled to process what his eyes had already seen. 0% probability of paternity. The sentence was clear, direct, and absolute. There was no room for interpretation, no space for doubt. In that instant, everything shifted. The room felt different, the air heavier, as if the world had quietly adjusted itself around a truth he had never anticipated. The questions began to surface with a clarity that only comes after the truth is revealed. Was this a single mistake, an isolated moment that carried consequences no one intended to face? Or was it something more deliberate, a hidden truth carefully managed over time? How long had Sarah known, not just about what happened, but about the possibility that Lily might not be Michael's child? And perhaps the question that lingered most heavily, the one that refused to settle quietly, was why Marcus stayed so close. Why he remained present in their lives, day after day, year after year, carrying a secret that had the power to destroy everything if it ever came to light. The neighborhood didn't change. The routines stayed the same. From the outside, nothing about Michael's life suggested that anything was wrong. But beneath that surface, the foundation had already begun to crack in ways that were invisible at the time. Because the truth wasn't something that arrived suddenly. It had been there, quietly shaping moments, influencing interactions, existing in the spaces between what was said and what was left unspoken. The signs were always there, woven into the fabric of their everyday lives in ways that felt insignificant in the moment. And Michael, trusting and certain in the life he had built, never saw them for what they were. Michael Turner had always believed in doing things the right way, even when it wasn't the easiest path. He grew up in a household where responsibility came before comfort, where keeping your word mattered, and where being present for your family wasn't optional, it was expected. That mindset followed him into adulthood, shaping the kind of man he became. He wasn't driven by attention or recognition, but by a quiet determination to build something steady and lasting. His job demanded consistency, long hours, and attention to detail, and he approached it the same way he approached everything else in his life, with discipline and focus. But no matter how demanding his work became, he never allowed it to come before his role at home. To Michael, being a father wasn't just a title, it was a responsibility he carried with pride, a role he poured himself into completely, without hesitation or doubt. In the early years of their relationship, Sarah had gone through periods of uncertainty, times when she questioned her own direction and decisions. Michael had been there through it all, offering stability when she needed it most. What he didn't realize was that some of those unresolved emotions had never fully disappeared. Marcus Reed had been part of Michael's life long before Sarah entered the picture, and over time, he became woven into the fabric of everything Michael considered important. Their friendship wasn't built overnight. It came from shared experiences, long conversations, and a sense of understanding that didn't require constant explanation. Marcus had a different way of moving through life, more spontaneous, more expressive, but that difference never created distance between them. If anything, it made their connection stronger. When Michael introduced Marcus to Sarah, the transition felt seamless. Marcus fit into their lives effortlessly, attending family gatherings, stopping by without needing an invitation, and gradually becoming someone whose presence felt expected rather than occasional. Over time, he wasn't just Michael's friend anymore. He was part of the household in a way that blurred the lines between guest and family. The dynamic between the three of them was built on trust, the kind that develops slowly and then settles into something that feels unshakable. There were no obvious tensions, no signs of conflict that would suggest anything was out of place. Michael trusted Sarah completely, and he trusted Marcus just as deeply. That trust created a sense of security, a belief that the people closest to him were exactly who they appeared to be. There was no reason to question their intentions, no reason to look beyond what was visible. Loyalty defined their relationships, and for a long time, that loyalty seemed genuine, reinforced by years of shared experiences and mutual support. But even in the strongest relationships, there are moments that carry meaning long before they are understood. To him, Marcus was family, and Sarah was his partner. The idea that there could be something hidden within those relationships never crossed his mind. Trust has a way of simplifying reality, of filtering out anything that doesn't align with what we believe to be true. And in Michael's case, that trust kept him from seeing what was quietly unfolding around him. What remained constant through all of it was his connection with Lily. To him, she wasn't just his daughter. She was his entire world. Everything he did, every decision he made, was shaped by the responsibility he felt toward her. That connection wasn't built on biology, though he believed it was. It was built on time, on presence, on the countless moments that define what it means to raise a child. And because of that, the truth, when it finally surfaced, wouldn't just challenge his understanding of the present. It would force him to re-examine the past, to question memories he had never doubted, and to confront a reality he had never prepared himself to face. Because sometimes, the truth doesn't come from strangers or distant events. Sometimes, it exists within the people you trust the most, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the moment when it can no longer remain concealed. The moment that would eventually unravel everything didn't begin with suspicion or confrontation, but with something ordinary, the kind of situation every parent faces at some point. When Michael finally confronted Sarah, the moment was quiet, almost restrained. He didn't raise his voice, didn't express the anger that had begun to build beneath the surface. Instead, he placed the results in front of her and waited. The silence between them carried more weight than any argument could have. Sarah didn't need to read the paper to understand what it meant. Her reaction came before any words, in the way she avoided his gaze, in the tension that settled into her posture. Michael watched her closely, searching for something, an explanation, anything that might shift the reality he was facing. But the silence continued, stretching longer than it should have, confirming what he had already begun to accept. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, controlled, but heavy with something that had been held back for years. She didn't try to deny it, didn't attempt to reshape the truth into something easier to accept. Instead, she acknowledged it, piece by piece, each word adding to the weight of what Michael already knew. It had happened years ago, during a time when their relationship had been strained, a moment she described as a mistake, something she never intended to define their future. But intentions didn't change outcomes, and the outcome was standing right in front of them, woven into 5 years of memories that now felt uncertain. Michael listened, not interrupting, not reacting outwardly, but internally, everything was shifting. And then, she said something that made it even worse. Sarah's voice didn't rise as she continued, and that was what made her words settle so heavily. She explained that it happened years ago, during a period when their relationship had been strained, when distance had quietly grown between them in ways neither of them fully addressed at the time. It wasn't something planned, she said, not something she carried into with intention, but a single moment that crossed a line she never expected to cross. And afterward, instead of confronting what it meant, she chose to move forward as if it had never happened. But what made the truth harder to accept wasn't just the betrayal itself. It was the uncertainty that followed it. She admitted that when she found out she was pregnant, she couldn't be completely sure whose child it was. And instead of facing that uncertainty, instead of giving Michael the chance to know the truth from the beginning, she chose silence. That silence became the foundation of everything that followed. 5 years of shared life, of memories, of trust, all built on a decision to withhold something that would have changed everything from the start. For Michael, the weight of that realization went beyond the act itself. It raised questions that didn't have simple answers. Why Marcus? Of all the people in his life, why the one person he trusted without hesitation? And why stay silent for so long, knowing that the truth, if it ever surfaced, would carry consequences far greater than the moment it came from? These weren't questions Sarah could answer in a way that would bring clarity. They existed in a space where emotions, choices, and consequences overlapped, making it impossible to separate one from the other. Michael found himself caught between emotions that didn't align, each one pulling him in a different direction. There was anger, sharp and immediate, directed at both Sarah and Marcus, for a betrayal that felt deliberate even if it wasn't planned that way. But alongside that anger was something else, something more complicated. The love he felt for Lily didn't disappear when he learned the truth. It remained, unchanged in its presence, even as everything around it shifted. That contrast created a conflict he couldn't easily resolve. How do you separate the pain of betrayal from the bond you've built with a child who has known you as nothing else but her father? The question didn't have an immediate answer, and that uncertainty became part of his reality. When Michael finally confronted Marcus, the moment carried a different kind of weight. There was no need for evidence, no need for explanation. The truth had already been established, and both of them understood that. Marcus didn't deny it. He didn't attempt to reshape the situation or minimize what had happened. Instead, he stood there, his expression marked by guilt, acknowledging the reality without resistance. That lack of denial didn't bring closure. If anything, it made the situation more difficult to process, because it confirmed that the betrayal wasn't something imagined or misunderstood. It was real, and it had existed for years within the very foundation of Michael's life. The man he trusted like family had already crossed the line, and there was no way to undo that. Stories like this don't just break families, they break people. The damage extends beyond the immediate moment, affecting how trust is understood, how relationships are defined, and how individuals see themselves within those relationships. Sarah eventually sought help from a therapist, trying to make sense of her choices, her guilt, and the impact those decisions had on everyone involved. It wasn't a quick process, and it didn't provide easy answers, but it was an attempt to confront something she had avoided for years. And in a way that might seem unexpected, Michael didn't leave. Not immediately, not in the way many might assume. He stayed, not because the situation was easy to accept, but because walking away came with its own set of consequences he wasn't ready to face. Over time, the surface of their lives began to resemble something familiar again. Routines returned, conversations resumed, and from the outside, things appeared stable. But beneath that surface, the reality was more complicated. Trust doesn't rebuild itself quickly, and even when daily life begins to feel normal, the impact of what has happened doesn't simply disappear. It remains, shaping interactions, influencing thoughts, existing quietly in the background. If you've ever seen a relationship survive something like this, you understand that survival doesn't always mean resolution. It means learning to exist within a new reality, one that carries both the past and the present at the same time. Because normal doesn't always mean healed. Lily remained the one constant in a situation where everything else had shifted beyond recognition. She still woke up the same way, still ran through the house with the same energy, still looked at Michael with the same trust she always had. When she called him Dad, there was no hesitation in her voice, no uncertainty in the way she reached for him. To her, nothing had changed, because she didn't know there was anything to change. The truth that had disrupted Michael's world had not touched hers, and that separation created a quiet tension that followed him everywhere. He began to notice the smallest moments more intensely, the way she laughed at something simple, the way she held on to him without question, the way she existed in a reality where love was uncomplicated and certain. And in those moments, Michael realized that the truth, as heavy as it was, had not altered what she felt for him, but it had changed what he now understood about their connection. The question that settled into his mind wasn't immediate, but it became impossible to ignore. What makes someone a father? Is it something defined by biology, by shared DNA and undeniable proof? Or is it built over time, through presence, through consistency, through the quiet, everyday moments that shape a child's understanding of love and security. Michael had lived 5 years believing those two things were the same. Now he understood they could exist separately, and that realization forced him to confront a truth that didn't come with a clear direction. Because while biology could be proven in a single document, the bond he had with Lily had been built over years, piece by piece, in ways that couldn't be measured as easily. But as Michael tried to find his place within this new reality, another complication began to take shape. Marcus, who had once remained in the background of their lives, started to reconsider his position. The truth had been revealed, and with it came a question he could no longer avoid. What role, if any, should he play now? At first, his presence became less frequent, almost cautious, as if he understood the damage his proximity could cause. But over time, that distance began to shift. There were moments when he seemed unsure of where he belonged, moments where the lines between past and present blurred in ways that made everything feel uncertain again. The possibility of him stepping into a role he had never openly claimed created a tension that Michael couldn't ignore. For Michael, this wasn't just about what had happened between Sarah and Marcus. It was about what came next, about decisions that would shape not just his life, but Lily's as well. Walking away would mean removing himself from the only reality she had ever known, creating a distance she wouldn't understand. Staying meant accepting a truth that challenged everything he believed about trust and loyalty. In the end, his decision didn't come from logic alone. It came from something deeper, something tied to the years he had spent being present in her life. He chose to stay, to continue being the person she believed him to be, even if the foundation of that role had been shaken. But staying didn't restore what had been lost. It didn't erase the knowledge he now carried, and it didn't return things to the way they once felt. Every interaction, every shared moment, existed alongside the awareness of what had changed. The familiarity remained, but it was no longer untouched. It carried a weight that hadn't been there before, a quiet reminder that some truths don't disappear, even when life continues around them. And as Michael adjusted to this new version of his reality, he began to understand that the hardest part of everything he had faced wasn't losing the certainty he once had in his marriage. It was deciding whether, in some way, he had already lost his daughter. The moment that brought everything into focus didn't come during an argument or a conversation filled with explanations. It came quietly, in a way that felt almost ordinary, yet carried more weight than anything Michael Turner had experienced since learning the truth. One evening, after a long day that felt heavier than most, he stepped into the house with the same thoughts that had followed him for weeks, questions without clear answers, emotions that refused to settle. Before he could even put his things down, he heard the familiar sound of small footsteps moving quickly across the floor. And then Lily appeared, her face lighting up the moment she saw him, her voice filled with excitement and certainty as she ran straight into his arms and said the one word that had come to define his entire world. "Daddy." There was no hesitation in her voice, no confusion, no distance. Just pure, unconditional love expressed in the simplest way she knew how. In that moment, everything Michael had been struggling to process seemed to pause. The questions, the doubts, the anger, all of it faded into the background as he held her. Because despite everything that had changed for him, nothing had changed for her. She didn't see uncertainty. She didn't feel betrayal. She didn't question the role he had played in her life. To her, he was exactly who he had always been. And that realization carried a clarity that no conversation or explanation had been able to provide. For the first time since the truth surfaced, Michael began to separate what had been done to him from what existed between him and Lily. She hadn't betrayed him. She hadn't made a choice that altered the course of their lives. She had simply lived in the reality she was given, forming a bond with the person who showed up for her every day, who cared for her, protected her, and loved her without condition. And in her own way, without ever needing to say it, she had chosen him, not once, but repeatedly, through every moment they had shared. That choice wasn't influenced by biology or circumstance. It was built on presence, on trust, on the quiet consistency that defines what it means to truly be there for someone. Michael understood then that the role he held in her life wasn't something that could be taken away by a single truth, no matter how significant that truth was. It had been built over time, shaped by experiences that couldn't be erased or replaced. And while the revelation had changed how he viewed the past, it didn't diminish what they had created together. The love he felt for her remained, not because of what he believed before, but because of everything they had lived through together. That connection existed beyond definitions, beyond expectations, beyond anything that could be written on a piece of paper. So Michael made a decision, not out of obligation, not out of pressure, but out of understanding. He remained her father, not in the way he had always assumed, but in a way that carried even more meaning. Because it was no longer based on something given to him, it was based on something he chose. Every day moving forward, he would continue to show up, to be present, to hold on to the bond they had built, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. And in that choice, he found a sense of clarity that had been missing since the truth first came to light. Sometimes, the deepest betrayals don't destroy love. They redefine it. They force it to exist in a different form, one that isn't tied to expectations or assumptions, but to actions and decisions made in the face of uncertainty. And in Michael's case, that redefinition didn't weaken what he felt. It strengthened it in a way he hadn't expected. Now the question becomes something each person must answer for themselves. If you were in his position, faced with the same truth, the same choices, and the same emotions, would you stay or would you walk away? As Michael Turner continues to live with the decision he made, his story doesn't end with a clear sense of victory or defeat. Instead, it leaves behind something more complex, something that stays with you long after the moment has passed. Because situations like this don't come with perfect answers, they leave people questioning what they would do if faced with the same reality, the same emotions, and the same impossible choice between love and truth. Michael chose to stay, to remain present in Lily's life, to continue being the father she has always known. But that choice, as powerful as it is, invites a deeper conversation about trust, forgiveness, and what truly defines a family. So now, the question turns to you. Do you think Michael Turner made the right decision? If this story made you think differently about trust, relationships, or what it really means to be a parent, take a moment to leave a like. And if you believe that family is more than just blood, that it's built on presence, sacrifice, and choice, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this, stories that challenge what we believe and make us see life a little differently. And if you think this betrayal was shocking, wait until you hear the next story.